Okay.
The next 10 years.
Yeah, the next...
That is the last talk, the last statement, the last dream for the first day here in Berlin, of Berlin.
Yeah, and it's a very soft one, you know, it's easy, it's about, again, about infrastructure, so there's nothing, no hard technology, so just relax and listen. I'm, let's say, reflecting on the next 10 years from the CLARiN perspective. And what is CLARiN? Well, most of you know what CLARiN is because, you know, I see so many familiar faces, but just for those who are not from these parts of the world, I'll just briefly explain what it is. It is a common language resource and technology infrastructure, and the basic idea of this infrastructure is to create a federation of European digital archives that contain language-based material. It could be data, it could be tools, could be spoken or written or multimodal expression, whatever. And we try to serve a target audience consisting of humanities and social sciences scholars. And what we want to provide them is uniform, single sign-on access from behind the desk to all the archives and all the tools. And especially access to the tools is what we find interesting because we want to give them access to existing language and speech technology tools in order to enhance their work. That means that these tools should allow them to retrieve data, to retrieve documents or interesting bits and pieces, to manipulate these data, to annotate them, to summarize them, to translate them, or anything they might want to do. And for us, it's important that all the languages are equally important. We do not make a distinction between big languages and small ones. I mean, they're all equally important. Dead or alive, it's all fine with us. And then we want to cover all European and associated countries. Now, our target audience, well, sometimes when I describe a target audience as humanities and social science scholars, people say, this is language technology for dummies. But that's not what it is. Of course, we have in our audience historians, theologists, philosophers, or whatever, who have very often no interest whatsoever in technology. They have no background in technology. So if you really want them to use these services, you have to make an extra effort to make it easy for them because you don't want to transform them into technologists in order for them to be able to use your facilities. But our audience also includes computational linguists and phoneticians, because normally in most European countries that's part of the humanities curriculum. And but in our case, it's important to note that our focus is on basic research, academic research, and not on industrial applications. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, how do we see, from our perspective, the priorities for Europe? Well, first of all, since we are an infrastructure, that's our first thing to look at. And research, I think, must innovate and must build on top of what's already there. We should not reinvent wheels, so we should really make sure that we can base our work on what has been done before. And I think that Nicoletta already said the same thing in her talk, and I think Hans mentioned it. It's very important that we make sure that we collect all the results, all the things that have been done, and build on them, rather than building new things next to the ones that already existed. And what's important for us? Well, sharing language resources and tools, sharing corresponding knowledge and expertise, because just the tools and just the data will not do. And we also think that the important opportunity for these, let's say, research infrastructure is that they allow you to innovate by crossing discipline boundaries. And I think that Sophia already hinted at the possibility to interconnect these infrastructures, because that will give more opportunities to do things and to reuse things that have been invented elsewhere. And as you have already heard, I mean, there are many emerging initiatives, and it's absolutely necessary that we collaborate and coordinate our activities, because otherwise we would be wasting taxpayers' money and our time. And that's a very crucial thing. Now, the funny thing is, I'm not going to tell you anything about let's say, the internals of the CLARiN infrastructure. And I must say that when I was listening to Sophia's talk, I thought, well, if you replace, in her talk, biology with humanities and social sciences everywhere, it could be my talk. So. Yeah, right. Yeah. But you made exactly my point. So I don't just reread Sophia's talk, and you will see how we want to operate. Because this is just about the priorities we see. Now, the question: what's our threat? What do I mean? Well, I've learned over the years that threats they're very bad. Threats and disasters and danger and risk are very bad. But they also ensure very good funding opportunities. Because, think about pollution, environment, energy crisis, climate change, defense. All these things are big threats for our society. And all the funders are willing to invest in that in order to make sure that we reduce the risks of all these things. So I think you need a disaster behind you in order to get funding. And of course, well, actually, disaster will be in front of you because you will be walking towards it. But I think it's very important that we try to identify our favorite disaster. And I think the one that, since I'm working in the social sciences and humanities, the one that I always mention is social climate change, as opposed to, let's say, physical climate change. And there are lots of, let's say, features that change in society. But there are two where I think language can play a role. Well, first of all, it has to do with everything that has to do with the mobility of citizens, migration, and I'll come back to that later, and with the aging population and demographic change. These are the things where I think that language can really play a role, and we should focus on that. Now, first of all, the mobility and migration. Well, there are lots of ways in which people have become more mobile and in which they migrate. It's not just physical movement, but it's also the labor market, economic opportunities, it's the free movement of persons, goods and services, and the refugees. I mean, there's lots of movement. People move from place to place, and we can certainly contribute by trying to take away the language barriers that exist for people who do move around either in the physical space or in the information space. I think it's very important, and that's also, I think, one of the foundations of the whole MetaNet project, because that's where the focus is, and we totally agree. And in our case, I would like to add that we do not think that this should be driven just by market forces, because if we did that, all the funding would go to the German language, to English, to French and Italian, and all the small ones, like my own language, would just sit in the cold. So I think it's very important that we focus not just on let's say, the needs of industry, but also on the needs of society, the needs of the citizens. Now the other priority area, that's the care for the health and care for the elderly. Because what you see is all around you, more patients, fewer nurses and other medical staff. You see that, at least in the Netherlands, you see that they're now starting recruiting hospital staff from abroad, simply because there is a shortage. So you can end up in your hospital bed being forced to speak English to the nurses and to the doctors. I mean, it's and if they're good, it's not really a problem. But I must say that I might still feel a bit uneasy if I had a Japanese or Chinese doctor talking to me and me being completely unable to understand even what the person is talking about. So I think there are some language barriers that we really should take away. And I think that from our point of view, we could really contribute to, let's say, the creation of bits and pieces of virtual hospitals where you use all sorts of communication means to replace human intervention. It already exists. I mean, remote sensing of all sorts of things, but also remote communication. It can be done. And it's crossing language barriers between patients and staff. And well, also in, let's say, in the hospital administration, you could do a lot by using language technology to reduce the workload. And I think here too, this is equally relevant for the big and for the small languages, because it shouldn't matter whether you are in a hospital in Estonia or in Latvia or in Germany. I mean, you really want to have the best possible care, and so we cannot afford in Europe to say, well, only the Germans will get proper care, because for the other ones we cannot afford the language technology too. Now, of course, many of you will say, aha, this guy is being very, very selfish, because you can all see that I'm a baby boomer, and there are a few other baby boomers here, and of course I know that in 20 years time I'll be probably sitting or lying in a home for elderly researchers somewhere in my country, and of course I'm a bit concerned about, well, the amount of care I will get. So I have to admit I am selfish, but at the same time this does not only affect me and, well, people from my age category. I mean, I see some of them. We've even got older people here, but it also affects you, younger generation, because you have to realize at the end you will end up paying for my care. So it's also in your interest that we try to use all our technologies in order to reduce the cost and at the same time keep the same or even a better quality. So I think that this is really a thing that we should focus on. It's not very popular. Actually, if there were an opportunity to submit a proposal now, and if I had the time, I would go to the European Commission and say, okay, I want to submit a proposal for, let's say, coordination or support action or whatever they call it, and I want to make a study of the opportunities for application of language and speech technology in healthcare. And as the final event of this whole project, I would organize another issue of the famous LangTech conference, but then dedicated to this specific topic. A very topical thing where we would get together people, both providers of technologies and the possible consumers, let's say the people from healthcare. I mean, it would be a wonderful project, but I can tell you, I'm giving this idea away because I will never have the time to do it. But I would certainly want to attend this conference. So now my last thing, my concluding remarks. Well, as I said, sustainable research infrastructure are really essential for the whole field of human language technologies. We cannot do without. Social climate change is something that we can use as a selling point to our funders, both for the small and for the big language. And I think it's something to remember, because I'm sure that if the same slogan comes up in many different places, the politicians will in the end say, well, yeah, social climate change, I've heard it before, it must mean something, and we should exploit it. And as I said, HLT could contribute by taking away the language barriers and use it in healthcare, and I think that we should really try to bring this to the attention of our funders and put it explicitly on our own agenda as well. Thank you.
Stephen Krauwer, thank you very much. Social climate change and language technology to prevent social climate change. That's the dream.
I would like to add one issue to Utrecht, because I like this very much. And after having spent a flight with a woman from the Finnish Ministry of Justice, and realizing that interoperability, legal interoperability across the European countries is being threatened by the fact that they're not able to communicate their differences, which is actually a task for language technologies. We have a very powerful political task ahead of us. That is, legal interoperability between the EU countries is a big threat. They will not succeed without us. So let's blackmail them.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Let me add that the whole legal, all these legal issues are also a problem for our own infrastructure, because, you know, since we want to share across languages and across countries, it's really horrible, because you see that there's so much difference in legislation in all these countries. So some data, maybe, you know, Finland is the worst country of all, because if you're in Finland, almost everything is forbidden. There's nothing you can do, whereas if you're living in the south of Europe, no one really cares. You can do whatever you want, and sometimes you get arrested and you bribe someone and you're out of trouble. But okay. Okay, you know.
Right, so do we have more questions? Statements? Things that we should do now? Hans is having fun in the background.
Now you have to fill the time, yeah.
Ladies, okay, fill the time. That is no. That
shouldn't be a problem. I wondered why we don't see all of your slides, but now they're not there.
I just wanted to grab the screen, but I said maybe
it must be something with incompatibility. But I think you've read most of it. I mean, it's. Well, okay,
Some letters, some notes maybe. Okay, do we have more questions? If this is not the case, then we could conclude our first day of this 2 days workshop.